Hello, I'm Andrew. I'm the activist in residence at your school, and thanks for sending me your questions. I will read them here and I'll let you know my answers. So, the first question was what was your motivation to help the ocean's corals? So I've always really enjoyed snorkeling my whole life. Ever since I was quite young, my family we used to go on snorkeling trips to Thailand and Malaysia, and me and my sister would be snorkeling on the reefs and see all the corals and the fish and everything. And so it's always been sort of my favorite ecosystem, and reef. Wanted to learn about reef fish my whole life. And so, yeah, as I studied biology in university and started seeing that there was quite a few issues with marine ecosystems in terms of pollution and degradation. I decided that it was something I needed to do was to figure out ways to work on restoration and restore coral reef ecosystems. So my most of my life I've really enjoyed coral reefs, and so that's why I have my passion and want to work with them. Yeah, the next question is, what is the most challenging thing about working in the ocean? Well, working in the ocean, the conditions constantly change. So sometimes there's storms, sometimes there's strong currents. There's always different environmental conditions that we're trying to work with. So it everything we do takes a lot of logistics and planning. So we need to figure out how do we access the site with the boats? Do we need snorkel equipment? Do we need dive equipment? Do we need just a boat captain? Do we also need helpers on the boat to help us with equipment? So once we figured out the logistics of how we're getting to the site and back, then we also have to be looking at the weather, and is the weather conditions changing? Are the waves getting bigger, and is it unsafe at any point in time? So that or are we able to do the activity that we plan on doing, whether it's transplanting corals or doing a reef survey? So I think one of the most challenging things is just always continuously analyzing the conditions of the ocean and figuring out how we're going to actually do the field work or do the work out in the ocean that we need to get done. Next question is, what is your favorite thing about working in the ocean? Well, my favorite thing is probably scuba diving because I learned to scuba dive when I was 12 and I fell in love with scuba diving. And so ever since that time, I've tried to spend as much time underwater as possible. So that's one of my favorite things about working underwater is I just get to breathe underwater and spend as much time as I can looking at the fish and pretending to be a fish and yeah, just being in a whole different ecosystem out of our regular lives. Next question. Do you have anything that you would say to the millions of people in the world who are supporting you? Well, millions of people. I don't know about that, but hopefully there's a growing amount of people who want to take care of marine ecosystems, and so part of what I'm trying to do is restore coral reefs in the area that I'm working, but also trying to educate and put together an education program where other people can learn to do restoration or learn to do work with marine ecosystems so that we can try and slowly repair different ecosystems around the world. And so I just hope that I can encourage other people to get on board and look at their local ecosystems and look at ways to improve the health of them, to make them healthy, to restore them, to reduce the amount of pollution and impacts taking place, whether it's just a beach environment or maybe an ocean environment or even something onshore. Hopefully it's a growing movement of people wanting to support the ocean environment. I'd like to ask, what is your role and what do you do day to day on your job? So I started up a marine conservation organization called Blue Corner Marine Research, and what the idea of it was is I wanted to create an organization that was able to do marine habitat restoration, but then also focus on education and creating a team of technicians and biologists that could go out and do restoration in different areas of Indonesia, where I'm based, but also the whole region. So my role is the company founder. I've tried to put together a team of staff that can help me out and organize all of the logistics of setting up the company, or the organization rather. But then also my role is to help with the training and teach students, take people out who come and want to work on a restoration site and show them the area, and then also organize the restoration site in terms of doing monitoring on the site to make sure that the corals are growing properly, choosing which species we want to transplant, and then choosing the methods that we are going to be transplanting in the corals to in the sites. Hopefully that answers some of your question. Your next question was, how would you describe dead coral reefs? You may have seen lots of videos and photos of living coral reefs, because that's what people like to see in videos. They're very colorful, lots of abundance of fish, so lots of different types of fish, so lots of diversity, but also a lot of volume, a lot of biomass of different fish. And not just fish, then the different substrates or the corals, the things that are growing and creating the habitat or the reef. So you get all sorts of different shapes, sizes, species that are growing and creating that habitat, just like a forest has different species of trees and plants. A coral reef will have lots of different species of corals. And then there's all the invertebrates, so things like crabs and sea urchins and sea cucumbers and sea stars. So so many different species in a coral reef ecosystem. So once we can see and visualize what a healthy ecosystem looks like, then it's easy then we can have a comparison of what if we are looking at a reef and it doesn't fulfill those kind of characteristics, then we know that it's not healthy. So in contrast, an unhealthy reef would have very low coverage of coral, so not a lot of living coral, hard corals or soft corals. There wouldn't be a lot of species of fish, and there wouldn't be very much of abundance of fish either. And the reasons for a degraded or a damaged reef might be all kinds of different reasons. It could be due to pollution. It could be due to breakages that maybe fishing boats or some sort of boats dragged their anchors and broke the reef and it hasn't been able to recover on its own. Pollution, damage, and then also from climate change, so changing environmental conditions, so warmer waters or increased carbon dioxide in the ocean can cause changes in the environment that can cause the coral reef then to decline. So your last question then, why is this project important to us and the ocean? Well, I think having a healthy ecosystem is important to everybody because we all live on this earth together, right? So it's not just humans that live on the earth, but also animals, fish, every other species that we're sharing the earth with. So we have to make sure that they have homes as well. But then also oceans are providing a lot of the oxygen that we breathe. They're providing a lot of the food that we eat. So our day-to-day lives actually depend on having a healthy ocean that provides us with this air to breathe, the food to eat. But then also recreation. People like to see healthy reefs and go visit them and enjoy being with nature. So when there isn't a healthy ecosystem or a healthy nature to see, then people aren't able to have that experience. So it does have some value that way as well. So having a healthy ecosystem has a lot of value to us. And so I think any project that works on trying to improve the health of an ocean ecosystem as well as restore a degraded or damaged ocean ecosystem is really worthwhile. And so I hope that my project is a worthwhile project, and I hope that as many people can come and help out and visit and learn about our project, but then also that it inspires other people then to start their own projects and work on restoration and improving the ecosystem health in your local area as well.
How is the corals now? The answer to this question really depends on where in the world, because in some areas, the corals still are quite healthy, and then some areas you've probably seen on the news where there's a lot of impact. So there's been huge bleaching events, which are when the coral reef gets too warm, and then the coral stresses out and loses its ability to feed itself and starts dying off. And so that's happened in a lot of areas such as the Great Barrier Reef and throughout Indonesia and Malaysia and the Maldives and some of these tropical reef areas. So there is a lot of areas where the reefs have become impacted from some of the warmer water temperatures, and then also from pollution in coastal areas near cities and ports and areas where the water is more polluted and dirty. And so that has impacted corals. So some areas, the coral reefs can be quite heavily impacted, where there may be just a small portion of what used to be a few decades ago. And then some areas, the coral is still doing quite healthy, and those areas are usually areas that are far away from from human civilization. So some of the remote islands, or areas where there's strong currents, or some a healthy environment where there's not too much fishing and not too much pressures from human activities. Here in Bali, where I'm working, there is some healthy reefs that are still around. So it's actually quite good for us as we're doing restoration, because we're trying to repair areas that are starting to degrade or become impacted, but there is still healthy areas right beside it. So we're able to take some of the healthy corals from these healthy areas and bring them to the unhealthy areas and help the whole area then become more healthy. Generally, globally, as you've probably read, coral reefs are on the decline, but there is still hope in some areas that there is areas that are still healthy and areas that we're able to restore. So that is good too. Louis also asked the question, is the coral important to humans? So any organism in the world is important to humans, because we're not the only species in the Earth. So we need to make sure that all the other species on Earth also have their ability to live. So it's important for us as humans to try and protect other ecosystems, so whether they're forests or coral reefs, or kelp forests, whichever the ecosystem is. It's important for us to try and protect those so that all of those animals in those ecosystems are able to survive. But beyond just the conservation reasons for us, corals are also a habitat or where fish and invertebrates and things like that call home. So if the coral isn't there, then there won't be any fish as well. And people eat fish, and so we need, if there's no coral, then there's no fish to eat. Another question is, why is keeping the ocean healthy important? So it's important that we don't pollute too much into the ocean and add too much waste or anything like that, so that the water quality of marine environments is healthy and stays of good quality, because the animals that live there need to live in healthy water, just like we need to breathe healthy air. If here on land, if we're breathing pollution and unhealthy air all the time, then it affects our health. So therefore, similarly in the ocean, if the fish and the animals that are living in the water, if their water is full of pollution or not healthy, then that's going to affect the health of those fish or those marine animals. So it might be at a small scale where maybe some of the pollutants are affecting the plankton and the phytoplankton, but then as fish eat that, the pollution that's in the plankton, and it magnifies up the food chain and up the food chain. By the time you get to some of the bigger predators like tuna and the apex predators, they become quite toxic with all of these chemicals magnifying throughout the food chain, the biomagnification. So it's really important that we don't poison animals that are living in the ocean through our pollution. But it's also important for us as humans, when we're eating fish, to make sure that the ocean is healthy and clean, so that the fish that are living in that water aren't polluted that we're eating. Because if we're eating fish that have been living in polluted water, that's going to be unhealthy for us as well. So it affects both the health of animals, but then also human health if there's a lot of pollution in the ocean. Next question is from Yo-Yo in class 7, and the question is, what can we do to have a healthy ocean? There's a few things that everybody can do. So we know that in order for coral reefs or any ecosystem in the ocean to be healthy, that it needs to have clean water. So if there's a lot of pollution or plastics or garbage that's in the ocean and in the water around, then the ecosystem won't be healthy, and the fish and all the animals that live there won't be able to have a healthy environment and a healthy home. So things that you and I and everybody can do is try and reduce the amount of garbage and pollution that goes into the ocean. So that might mean recycling garbage that you use in your everyday life, reduce the amount of plastic bags you use, the plastic packaging of things you buy. Just try to reduce our consumption or the amount of products that we buy that have plastic or that might be thrown away. So that they don't end up in landfills or in rivers or out into the ocean. Because a lot of the garbage that starts on land, it ends up drifting out into the ocean through streams and creeks and water runoff and gutters. So then once everything collects out into the ocean, then it will become an unhealthy environment. So the biggest things that we can do, you and I can do, are reduce our amount of garbage that we produce and recycle as much as we can, and reduce the consumption of excess things that we don't need to buy. The next question is from Leon in class 7. And the question is, I want to ask Andrew, why does he feel like saving the ocean, and what made him save the ocean? I first learned to dive when I was 12, and on the reefs that I learned to dive on together with my sister, I remember being really beautiful with lots of coral and lots of fish, and the memories I have of those reefs were just so full of life and so much biodiversity. And I went back quite a few years later to those same reefs once I had become a dive master, and the same reefs that I had learned to dive maybe 10 years previous, they were no longer as healthy as what I could remember from my memories. And so it made me really realize how coral reefs are starting to decline in health in a lot of areas of the world. So I really wanted to do something about it because it made me quite sad watching seeing these coral reefs that had previously been beautiful and hosting many fish and sharks and all sorts of life that were now almost dead reefs. And so because of that, then I decided to go to university and learn more about marine biology and then train in how to do restoration of marine ecosystems, and then start restoring coral reefs and marine ecosystems. This next question is, how many coral structures have you planted? Over the last 3 to 4 years now, at our coral restoration project here in Bali, I've put out about 350 frames. So these frames are about 1 meter square, and on those frames I attach 40 fragments of coral, so small pieces of coral that are only about 10 centimeters long, that attach onto the frame, and then as they grow out, they start growing over the entire frame and creating a quite big coverage. So 40 pieces of coral on 350 frames is about 14,000 pieces of coral that I've transplanted out onto that particular restoration project.